Well, good afternoon, Team Jackson and our extended family out there. And I want to thank all of you again for joining us for our COVID Town Hall. And I appreciate you taking the time out today and giving us this time every week, like many of you have, to keep yourself informed about your soldier, about our community, and about our installation. So I've cut the panel today, so I have with me still Colonel Chad Koenig, our Medical Activity Commander, and to my left, our Garrison Commander, Colonel Wes Hankins. I'm going to jump right into the updates. We'll do another quick round so you can get some updates from our medical activity as well as our garrison, things that we're doing here on the installation, and then we'll jump right into Q&A or question and answer. So with that, I want to go ahead and start with the slides with a bit of good news to lay out to you, because there's a lot of great news surrounding COVID-19, and I know we look at this as in terms of a lot of bad things happening and not a lot of good news coming out, but there's good news every single day, even as we go through COVID-19, and the good news is our Army keeps rolling along, not just here at Fort Jackson, but everywhere else. And what you see reflected up there, and my first shout out, if you want to call it that, is to all of our drill sergeants who really make this work and put in the effort every single day. They put themselves in harm's way prior to COVID-19, and they continue to do that every single day to transform your soldier, your civilian, into a soldier. And you can see highlighted what they do with regard to all of the new measures and requirements that we have with regard to COVID-19 from the screenings, and this is on the way out. So this is as we have continued to ship soldiers to advanced individual training. You'll see on the right those requirements that we have to sterilize that transportation. We do that on our own to ensure that we don't proliferate the spread of COVID-19 to anywhere else outside of our footprint or to any other installation. Next slide, please. And this is another reason that Fort Jackson keeps rolling. It's our great workforce and community. And again, our workforce encompasses a lot of people, not only our drill sergeants, but our leadership, our contractors, and our DA or Department of the Army civilians that we have that make this whole thing work. Up to the left, I took a visit to our commissary today, like myself and the Garrison Commander frequently do, just to see where we are with our stocks, things that we've got in place, and they're doing very well. Some of the new things that we have, and I'll talk about those, as you see on the right, the gift card. So we hear you with regard to those things that we know you want. And we can't provide you everything, but we understand that you want to in some way support your soldier, even though you can't come here to attend a graduation or a family day. So we established My Fort Jackson Soldier at afees.com. That is your way to reach out through that email and say you want to provide a gift card to your soldier. They will have access to the PX and some of the other areas that will accept that gift card here on the installation or any other installation to go buy those things you need. And it's your way of saying congratulations, great job on your part, because your soldier has done a very hard thing. Most in our nation has not done the things that they've done during their time here. Less than 1% of our population serve our great nation and are doing what your soldier signed up to do. The other thing for our community, we have Fort Jackson COVID-19 at afees.com. And that's for those families that are in a quarantine status and even some unique situations. You can order an online order to the PX post-exchange and then have someone pick that up for you if you're in a quarantine or isolation status. So two great things that our workforce is doing for us. And then to the left of this picture, you see our seamstresses. We have tailors and seamstresses that every single week they do thousands and thousands of uniforms. They tailor our dress uniforms for your soldiers when they graduate. They measure them, they do all the fitting, and they make sure they look the way they should, and then a uniform fashion on graduation day. But because of that workforce is a very vulnerable population, a lot of them, they can't telework given what they do, obviously, but they're at home to keep them out of harm's way and to protect the force. That still remains priority number one, to protect the workforce so that we protect our mission. But that does not mean that they've stopped doing what we need them to do. Given the order from the Secretary of the Army to ensure that everyone has protective coverings over their face, our seamstresses now are producing face covers for our soldiers and our workforce. Not at a great rate at this point, but every single day they're increasing their capacity to help us bridge the gap between the face coverings that we can make in a field expedient manner, as we call it, and until we get other orders in to provide face protection for all of our workforce and our soldiers in training. And I appreciate the notes, the cards and letters and offers of those of you out there that wanted to contribute and send them in, and we have an address established for that as well. But if the camera can pan back on me for a second, just to give you an idea of what that mask looks like, that our seamstresses make for us is form fitting over the face. They make these, they're gonna make them in two colors, black and brown. Black and brown will be the colors. But again, that's just something and a very unique way of being innovative in our workforce and what they're doing for us, and we certainly appreciate it. So next slide, please. So what's changed in 7 days? Always like to review the bidding with all of you and let you know what's changed since our last town hall. And as we've stated from the beginning, information changes very rapidly. The shelf life is slowing down a bit, but I've always said the shelf life for the information is about 24 hours. So this is key to us to let you know what's changed over time. If you look at the Department of Defense and the Army level, the Department of Defense has suspended shipping to basic combat training. What does that mean? We no longer will receive recruits between the dates of 6 through 19 April. Everything else continues per normal, but we're taking a pause across Department of Defense, all services, not just Army, not just here at Fort Jackson, to set other conditions to make sure we all have the right conditions, all have the right measures in place to resume our shipping operation. But you also have to look at what is occurring across our nation and where some of those recruiting stations are and where some of those military entrance processing stations are. And they're in states that are very red when you consider looking at the map, and those states that are having a high level of COVID positive cases and as well as deaths. So the Department of Defense has slowed shipping from across the board, primarily to save and protect the force from inheriting in any other positive cases. And what have we changed here? The Secretary of the Army issued a mandate that when possible, to the greatest extent possible, we would all wear face protection or mask, if you want to use that term. And also the key caveat in his memo was when we could not obtain or where you cannot obtain a 6-foot bubble or 6-foot social distance. That does not mean you have to wear the mask at all times. That is a personal preference if you want to do that on the installation. The thing that we have done on the installation is added the caveat in public facilities on our installation. You will wear that mask. And when I describe public or define public facilities for you, you think of our post exchange, you think of our commissary, areas where it will be very hard to maintain that 6-foot bubble because you're walking down aisles, you're passing other people. And so in those locations, it will be mandatory. Everywhere else, we will apply the Sec Army's guidance of to the greatest extent possible. And when we cannot obtain a 6-foot bubble, if you see a soldier running PT or a formation running PT, they will have social distance like you see at the bottom, but they will not have mask because they're outdoor. We will maintain that distance, but we always err on the side of what the guidance is and those caveats that I just described. And the pictures on the right show you a graduation today. 260 infantry graduated today, and that's their photo at the top. You will notice from that photo that they're in our fatigue uniform. Our graduations from this point until a later date will continue to be in this uniform because I've already mentioned the impact to our seamstresses and our tailors and that workforce, and how much of that workforce is now in a reserve capacity for us because they're up in age workforce, and we don't want to put them at danger or at risk by any means, but they're able to work for us in a great capacity and helping us make masks. But your soldier will receive their Army service uniform, the blue uniform that they typically wear on graduation day once they get to AIT. And I'll skip to the picture at the bottom. And again, another example of social distance and what it looks like here in our environment, and that is 2nd Battalion 39th Infantry in this past Saturday. And what they were doing is that battalion commander was bringing in all of his soldiers, all of the trainees, to inform them of what's going on with COVID-19 outside of Fort Jackson. Because as you know, all of our trainees and soldiers in training come from all over the states, and we want to keep them informed as well of what's going on in their state. And that's just one example of one battalion commander taking the time to do that with his soldiers and trainees, and all of our commanders are doing those same things. In terms of continuing limited access, the key thing to highlight there is we're opening up some of our restrictions with regard to things that we've had in place. As an example, for our permanent party personnel that reside here on post, our veterans, our correctional retirees in the community, we've increased our limits, our spending limits in the commissary up to 300 because The processes that we put in place are now working. Our shells do not look remotely or anywhere remotely close to what they look like outside of our gates because of our process, because of our procedures. Again, not a lot of folks like those when we put them in place, but they're working. Our stockage levels are up. They're very consistent, which now allows us to increase that maximum spending limit within our commissary. We have received our initial operating capability to test for COVID-19. I'll not steal a lot of Colonel Koenig's thunder, but all that means is now we have our own internal ability to test. But does that mean everybody will test? No. Everybody will not test, because similar to you see across our country, the short supply of tests and the protocols that are in place for screenings and everything else, but we have a more rapid ability to get turnaround on the tests that we do here on Fort Jackson. And then lastly, we continue to train. I heard the Army Sergeant, the Sergeant Major of the Army say just today, the Army is still open. We have not stopped business, and we're doing what we need to do for our country. And we have continued shipping operations to advanced individual training. And I'll talk you through exactly what that looks like and exactly where we are in time. Next slide, please. And here it is. The key question is, where's my soldier? And if your soldier's graduated, they have certain phone privileges, and you will be able to talk to them or speak to them once they've graduated, in that window they've graduated. Some battalions have released or relieved some of the restrictive privileges and allowed calls home for various things, a variety of things. But as I reminded you all before, they have the one phone call when they get here. Unless something major occurs, they'll get a phone call at some point in between, but they get the phone call on the end. So primarily 2 points that they're going to call home. With regard to COVID-19, if they test positive, they will call home if they test positive. But you can see from the graphic here, and I'll walk you through the best way that I can so you can see where we are in time with regard to our shipping operations and where your soldier is. To the top, you see the dates by the month. You also see to the left the unit, 2nd Battalion, 13th Infantry, 1st Battalion, 61st Infantry, and all the way down. You see the cycle reflected red, white, and blue, and the graduation date indicated by the star underneath the month. Not providing you the exact date, but you can see if you look at 213 as the example, they graduated around the 27th of May, or correction, March. That was their graduation date. But given COVID-19, it's been about 3 weeks before we've been able to ship all of that battalion to their respective locations, and I'll cover those reasons, and I've covered those reasons in previous town halls. And you can see proceeding from there, 161, their graduation date. Now we're down to about 2 weeks post-graduation that we're able to ship to certain locations for advanced individual training. 334 graduated last week. You see their graduation date. The thing that we're doing now is all of those soldiers that graduate, we're sending them to one battalion. That way we're trying to make sure we continue to maintain a safe bubble, keep those soldiers clean, as we call it, and also consistently repeat our process to ship to other locations without shipping any other installation across our Army a positive case. So we've consolidated. As they graduate, we consolidate in the 3rd Battalion, 34th Infantry Regiment. The gray box simply replicates the amount of time, roughly about 2 to 3 weeks as it stands right now, but that time is getting better because we're being able to ship more at a more frequent basis because we started and we proved the point that we can do this sterile, safe shipping to other locations. To the left, you'll see how much of 3 battalions, 213, 161, and 334 we've shipped to date. So all 3 of those battalions combined, we've shipped roughly 62% of that. The battalion that graduated today, 260 Infantry, you see at the bottom, they have not shipped. We will get them over, consolidate them in 334 Infantry's footprint, and we will continue on with our shipping operations. For the remaining battalions that are there, you will see I will not provide specific dates due to operational security reasons, but you can generally see the weeks when they should ship. 3rd week of April, 4th week of April, 1st week of May, in those time frames. But again, we're adding on a week or 2 until we continue to get our pace up and more AIT locations are ready to receive shipping soldiers off to their AIT locations. And it's key to note the caveat at the bottom. You look at the numbers that we've shipped. This is after the fact information, so I'm not revealing operational security, but out of those numbers, we have sent 0 positives to any other installation, which is the mark of success for any of us, any other installation, to prove that we can safely do this within the bubble, prove that the procedures and the measures that we have in place work, and we can continue on doing what we need to do for our nation. Next slide, please. So here's what the shipping operations and locations look like. To date, as I've discussed already, our AIT locations by ground transportation only is where we started, and we've only been allowed to do ground transportation moves, and that's not only for us, but that is also at AIT locations to ship their soldiers onto their first units. Those reflected in green are the locations that we've shipped to date. Those that are in red are upcoming. We have not shipped to those locations because this is under the umbrella of our higher headquarters. It is very coordinated, it is very synchronized. It is what we do in all branches of our service. We synchronize, we coordinate, and we make sure things are set at both the point of debarkation and the point of receipt of our soldiers. If you look at on the right side of it, you'll see air transportation. To date, we have not been approved to do air transportation, but as of yesterday, we were approved to do contract air. And what does that mean? We will contract the entire aircraft. Similar to what we do with the buses, we will go on, we will clean, we will disinfect and sterilize those planes, and then put soldiers on them and ship them to the distant locations that we have not been able to get to or that we cannot get to based on ground transportation moves. And you can see those far off locations from Fort Jackson, South Carolina, and you can see the distant locations that we're trying to get the remaining soldiers to. The planning is still going this week. Hopefully by next week we can start taking our turns on this contracted air method of transportation and getting soldiers to their advanced individual training locations. Next slide, please. I titled this slide "Too Early to Tell." I just wanted to give you a snapshot of what things look like here in South Carolina if you're not tracking those closely. But as of to date, as of a few hours ago, you can see the number of cases here in South Carolina is public information on the DHEC site. You see the number of deaths on the left in red, which is very unfortunate, a lot lower than many other places. But given COVID-19, that's the one thing we all have to be mindful of. There's a lot of death that is occurring across our nation, and feel very sad and very sympathetic to those families that are losing loved ones and relatives and friends due to COVID-19, and then the number of positive cases. So relatively low in comparison to many other places here in South Carolina. And at the bottom, you may not be able to see it, but South Carolina's projection for the peak here is at the end of April, so 29 April. But again, it's a estimate, it's a projection, it's a forecast of what South Carolina thinks they're going to see by the end of April. And of course, we're right in the middle of that bubble here in the state. But it's too early to tell on a lot of other things. And I know there's a lot of concern, there's a lot of anxiety with regard to what's going on and what does the future look like. And with the indicators and the questions that we get, the distancing guidance, when will that be relaxed? It's very hard to tell. You hate to give an answer that relies on it all depends, but it does. It all depends. It depends on what we do, how compliant we all are to get ourselves back to normal at some point in time. And you can see the list of other things that are up there that I know are on your mind, or the question may come up, when will we open child development centers? It all depends. It depends on when we see this peak, when we can get on the backside of this curve or flatten this curve, and then keep it flat and keep that flat consistently over time. So I can tell you it's not going to be a light switch. We get on one side of the peak and the light switch comes on and everything's back to normal. It's not going to happen that way here, and I seriously doubt it's going to happen that way anywhere else. And our way of stepping out of this will be very deliberate and very gradual, as the same way we stepped into it. So you can see the needle on the right, we're at contain, and we're going to stay there until we know that we are flat. We have flattened this curve, and we continually stay there in a consistent manner, and then we will start working our way back to normal, and that will take time. Can I give you an estimate on how long that will take? I cannot, and nor do I want to give you a false sense of hope or security with regard to an estimated date. Next slide, please. And so with this, I want you to see what the departing soldiers look like as they go, and all the requirements that not only our drill sergeants, our leaders take, and the precautions that they take to ship soldiers to their advanced individual location. We screen the drivers. The bus companies have been very cooperative. They send additional buses, they send spare drivers, just in case there's an issue with the driver. You see it in the bottom left, where we do the sterilization. We do that on our own to make sure that there's nothing on that bus that would contaminate one of our soldiers leaving here and going to a different location. And in the bottom center, you see me, but that was a couple of days ago. Continuing to award those soldiers before they graduate, those that have made Soldier of the Cycle, Soldier Leader of the Cycle, as well as Drill Sergeant of the Cycle. And then you can see the happy faces under the face protection and the mask going off to their next duty location. And it may look close from the picture, but it's not. We put about half of a bus capacity on that bus. So a 44 PAX bus, we only put about 20 or 21 on that bus. They're one-stop trips given the mile radius so that we can get them from point A to point B safely in a secure and sterile fashion. Next slide, please. And then lastly, you can see up here the other destinations. So this is what it looks like when they get to Fort Lee and Fort Eustis, those that have MOSs that take them to those particular installations. And it continues in terms of the social distance, the requirements they have to, and measures they have to keep in place. They check temperatures, they screen them again once they're there. And so far, this is working very well. And we're very proud that we had the pilot to do this and demonstrate that we can do this very well, which has now allowed other installations to do the same thing, so we can continue our training pipeline, we can continue to get soldiers to their first unit, and we can continue to do what we need to do for our nation. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Colonel Koenig for any update he has, and then over to Colonel Hankins, and then we'll get right to your questions. So Chad.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, sir. Colonel Chad Koenig. I'm your Medical Activity Commander and Director for Health Services for the installation. So I wanted to start by thanking everyone for being so patient as we adjust our processes and in order to help keep you and also the employees at Fort Jackson safe. So I'd like to encourage everyone to continue to take advantage of the virtual option. Anytime you need an appointment, we are still there for you, but the virtual option is the best way that we can take care of you while also taking care of ourselves. So we're adding platforms every day. So it started off as just telephone based, but now we're also using Adobe Connect, Google Duo, FaceTime, and a series of other platforms are slowly coming online to make it quick, easy, and convenient for you to get your health care from your home. In some cases, you will still need to come into the clinic, and that is completely acceptable. We just want to limit that as much as we possibly can. Also, please also continue to use mail order pharmacy whenever feasible. Again, another great example of the best way to keep you safe in your home while still meeting your needs. As General Beagle mentioned, there has been a couple changes over the last 7 days, and that includes changes in medical services. He indicated that there was a change in lab services. We have now come online with limited capacity to test in-house. We always collected samples. Just in the past, we sent it out to either a contract lab or the state lab. Now, for a limited amount of samples, we're able to do them in-house and hence get same-day turnaround for some key individuals or key scenarios where we need to test and get the results back as fast as we possibly can. So in previous virtual town halls, I mentioned that we would be limiting some routine appointments, but in the past that did not extend to any readiness appointments. Even the routine readiness appointments we were continuing to go forward with. But based on some new Department of the Army or DA guidance, we're now pausing some routine medical appointments also, especially things like hearing and visual checks. But what we will continue to do is anything legal, anything separation-based, anything retirement-based, anything deployment-based, and also the disability medical appointments. All those medical appointments will continue. Routine annual physical health examinations like your PHAs, we have been doing a large majority of those virtually recently, even before COVID came online. We will continue to do the virtual ones, but if you had a face-to-face appointment scheduled, we will probably be giving you a call and determining whether it is feasible to do that appointment virtually. And if it's not, we may end up rescheduling it and putting it on pause until the situation on the ground changes a little bit. But outside of that, those are my updates for today. I will be followed by Wes Hankins, the Garrison Commander, and I'll be ready to answer your questions at the end of the session. Wes?
Thank you, Chad. Thank you, and good afternoon, Fort Jackson family. We really do appreciate your patience, your understanding, and cooperation as we continue to manage the challenges and impacts that are related to COVID-19. Your willingness to exercise personal self-discipline, comply with the post policies, and adapt to a very real and changing environment and conditions have helped enable our success that we've been able to experience thus far on our installation. We appreciate your continued support as we focus on community protection to ensure everyone's safe and health and safety. Also integrating essential installation services required to support the Fort Jackson community and the Fort Jackson mission, and the effective communication, both internal and external, to ensure that everyone remains informed in this rapidly changing environment. I would like to highlight the frontline efforts of our garrison agencies and partners that are critical to ensure the delivery of essential personnel services and all of the services here on Fort Jackson. First and foremost, we thank our security force personnel who are at higher risk while working the front lines of our installation gates and ensuring the law enforcement continues to occur here on our installation. Their efforts to screen those individuals coming onto the installation and put themselves potentially at risk to that interaction are critical to the protection here. Our emergency services personnel and first responders also have greater inherent risk while they continue responding to both on and off installation calls. We thank you. To our food industry workers, ranging from delivery personnel to those working in our commissary and those preparing the food for pickup at various venues, we thank you for working the front lines and continuing to provide those services to the patrons and workers that are here on Fort Jackson. Those medical workers, both on and off Fort Jackson, who continue to meet the medical needs of our community while treating those who are ill, we thank you. Our APHIS exchange workers continue providing services to meet the needs of Fort Jackson patrons and our trainees every single day, while also communicating the arrival of shortages to ensure that people know when our shelves are stocked and those items are available. Our utilities and maintenance workers in the Fort Jackson cantonment area who keep our infrastructure running, as well as our Balfour Beatty workforce and our maintenance workers there who continue responding to urgent and emergency work orders to ensure the quality of life of our residents in our housing areas. Also, our military, civilian, and contractor workforce ensures essential installation operations continue with little or no interruption. Truly phenomenal efforts by each and every one of them. For those on administrative health leave who are not eligible to do telework but form our safe and secure reserve at home, we thank you for following the practices needed to keep you and your family and loved ones safe. As conditions allow, we look forward to your return, as you will be an essential part of gradually restoring all of our community services and activities when that time comes. We thank our Dodea Schools administration and faculty for their extensive efforts to continue that distance learning, making those meals available to our students, and maintaining consistent communication with our families throughout. Your ability to ensure the learning of our families' children is essential to our community. To our incredible retiree community, which is over 25,000 strong regionally, and also the Fort Jackson Retiree Council, your leadership, communication efforts, and support have ensured the success and protective measures which impact many of our retirees. Those retirees have sacrificed and selflessly served our nation while in uniform and are important to our community. We understand the impacts, and we sincerely thank you once again for your selfless support. To all Fort Jackson patrons and on-post residents, we thank you for taking protective measures seriously, exercising self-discipline, and doing your critical part to protect our community and making it the community that you expect it to be. Thank you, sir.
Okay, so with that, we'll turn over to your questions. We had a little bit of technical difficulty, so if it got a little bit darker in the room, we had a light go out. No big deal. As long as you can hear us, we'll keep going. So with that, we'll go ahead and start with the first questions.
To assess the travel permissions for active duty single parents that need to travel outside of the radius for custody visits and exchanges.
Okay. And I think just to make sure I know they can hear the question so I don't have to repeat it, can they hear you ask the question? Okay, so the question can be heard, but it was asking about active duty and travel restrictions for custody or visits. The restrictions, the limitations are 120 miles from Fort Jackson, from the post headquarters. If there is a need to get custody or go make an exchange with another parent to get custody of children based on a court order or something along those lines, then that is allowable. You have to send up that request, that exception, but that is not approved at my level. That is approved several levels above me, but the justification has to be right. With regard to visits, you can attempt to do the same thing. Cannot guarantee that would get approved, but again, go through your chain of command, send up the request, make sure the justification is what you need, it describes what you're trying to get, and then we'll pass it through. It will come through me for review and then go higher for approval. But thanks and great question.
Question 2, What is being done for geo-bachelor individuals whose families reside outside of the travel radius and their spouses are considered essential medical employees and are unable to obtain child care due to the pandemic?
Okay, in that particular situation, again, go to your chain of command and lay out what the situations are. In that particular case, the spouse lives outside of the radius, there's limited or no child care options available, and then you're talking to a geographically separated family. So when it comes to that, the chain of command needs to know what all those dynamics are and lay those things out. Because the one thing we don't want to do is cause a hardship or an unnecessary hardship on a family to make certain arrangements, to make certain things possible. So I would say not being able to avoid or not give you an answer now is you'd have to lay out those details and that justification to the chain of command and then see where it goes from there. If you don't have a satisfactory answer, then by all means, if you're on this installation, if you're that geographically separated soldier, then get in contact with me and run that up to me for review. But thank you.
Will soldiers who are coming home have to self-quarantine since they will be traveling?
So a soldier coming home, if they're in a case or in a capacity where they're going to come home after graduation, that case will be very rare. Mostly it's going to apply to a National Guard or a reserve soldier that is here under what we call a split option. They'll do basic training, but they'll do advanced individual training later. If that soldier is coming back home and there's someone in the house with some type of medical or underlying issue that you feel uncomfortable with or uncertain about the soldier coming back, we can tell you that as we graduate and screen soldiers out, they will leave here negative in terms of anything. We will not deliberately send anybody out that has any type or fail any part of the screening. But if you're for your own comfort and those in your own household, I would advise you to make other arrangements. We're not going to we cannot direct what they do once they're at home. But if it's not within your comfort level, when they do return home, I would ask you to make other arrangements for them for 14 days just to give yourself a level of assurance. A great point.
Two-part question here. First part, will some BCT graduates be able to come home instead of waiting to ship to AIT? Second part, won't Fort Jackson eventually reach its capacity?
Okay, with the two-part question, will soldiers be allowed to come home after BCT? The short answer is no, because if they're graduating BCT and their next assignment is advanced individual training, they will go straight to individual training. Granted, I've laid out the wait times that we're seeing right now based on how the shipping process is going, but if there's a gap in between, they're not going to come back home unless they're a guard or a reserve soldier that is here under a split option. With regard to our capacity, things work the way they work with regard to our capacity, and given we're allowed to ship, then our capacity stays where we need it to be. We have the largest capacity in the Army. We produce more soldiers than 3 other installations combined. So capacity is not a concern as long as we can ship, and we are continuing to ship.
For soldiers who are currently in a holdover status, when will their phone privileges take effect?
So soldiers in a holdover status, and when will their phone privileges take effect? Understand that the phone privilege is just that. It's a privilege. It is not a right. Some soldiers may not relay to loved ones that sometimes those privileges are taken for different infractions, which may not be relayed to you. Typically, as I highlighted before, they will have that privilege when they arrive to let you know that they have arrived here safely. They will also have that privilege granted again once they graduate or the week of their graduation to let you know that they will graduate. There will be a ceremony so you can watch it in the past before COVID-19 to notify you that you can come see it. There was that confirmation that they would graduate. But those in a holdover status, if they're in good standing, as we call it, they've not committed any other infractions, those chain of commands have loosened those restrictions to where they have access to their phone on a more frequent basis, but it's not a 24-hour basis. They do not retain those phones. And just so you all know, when we do our shipping operations, we retrieve their phones 24 hours out for operational security reasons. We don't need photos. We don't need any other type of shenanigans going on buses or videos of that or anything posted as they're traveling. And we want to keep them secure. You've seen the numbers. So when it comes to will they have their phones before they ship, the answer is no to that as well. But thanks and great question.
Are soldiers in training that are National Guard or Reserve still planning on going to AIT once they graduate from basic training?
And I think I've answered that. It depends on the status of that Guard or Reserve soldier. If their contract is such that they go from basic to AIT, then that's what they'll do. If their contract is a split option to where they do basic now and they do advanced individual training at a later date, and you're talking months, in some cases you're talking almost a year, then they go home and then they report back at that later date to their AIT.
Why are soldiers in training not allowed to be flown to their AIT locations?
And I think I've explained the difference with the flights, and it's not that they're not allowed to fly. It's based on where we are in time. Our first option and the first thing to prove is that we could do it by ground, and we've proven that. As of yesterday, so if you're coming in late, I briefed that as of yesterday, we're approved now to do contracted flights to those distant locations because we're not going to make those moves in a bus trip. That's multiple days, which is not fair to anybody to do that, to go cross country with some of these distant locations, but we'll have contract air. As that works out, there's about a 4-day cycle for us to plan, rehearse, get that coordinated, and then execute. But we're probably a week, if not more, away from executing the flight aspect of our shipping operations to the distant locations. But good question.
Quick clarification. My National Guard husband, who is currently at BCT and graduates April 30th, is supposed to go to the Defense Language Institute before AIT. Because his DLI class doesn't begin until May 14th, will he be sent home or kept at Fort Jackson or sent to DLI?
Okay, so you have a case where there's a gap in training. Graduation in April the 30th, and then the next class or the AIT starts May 14th. In that case, that soldier will still go directly to the AIT. They will not come home in that window because it's not a split option. They will go directly to their AIT location, and that's where that time will be absorbed until their class starts, but they will not come home within that window.
When will OCS candidates move on to Fort Benning?
I will tell you, OCS candidates will start moving this week. That was one of the points that I laid out, or one of the locations I laid out that was in red. But as of this week, we will start to ship the OCS candidates that have graduated to Fort Benning.
Are soldiers who have AIT at Fort Jackson still on track to go straight to AIT upon their BCT graduation?
So soldiers that do have AIT here at Fort Jackson, those MOSs will go straight from basic training over to the AIT location here as a interpost move, and we've done that for the past 3 weeks. So every class that graduates, our AIT here, 369 AG Battalion, will receive those graduates that are going to AIT right here on Fort Jackson. There's no major delays in that movement because it's all on our installation.
When will we be able to schedule for household goods pickup?
You can schedule your household good pickups now, and I'll allow Garrison to talk a little bit more through that. What it all depends on is once the stop move is expired, which as of now the Department of Defense stop move expires on 25 May, but Wes, I'll let you continue on with that one.
Sir, thank you. As Brigadier General mentioned, we are currently under a stop move policy across the Army. That is also impacting the ability of government civilians to be able to move from one job to a new job for which they may have been hired. However, you can coordinate with your local transportation office at each one of those local installations to determine the availability of when you can begin scheduling those appointments. If you are separating from the military, you can go ahead and schedule those transition appointments because you will be separating from the military altogether. Those appointments are not being held up. So you can schedule those and continue with your transition to leave the service. For those of you that are PCSing, the Army has yet to announce when the window will be lifted for stop move. And so any of those transportation appointments can be started, but those final pickup dates would not be able to be scheduled until the Army lifts their stop move policy and provides additional guidance on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Wes.
The civilians that are supposed to ship to basic in early May, will they still go to BCT?
So civilian recruits that are supposed to ship in early May, will they still come to BCT? They will come to BCT. What I can't tell you is will they come on that original timeline that was established. As I pointed out earlier, the stop movement of recruits to basic training or to us is from 6 to 19 April. Whether that is extended or not, that decision has not been made, which is not my decision. So we'll know after the 19th if that is going to stay in place and shipping operations resume. But there's different dynamics based on where that particular civilian is coming from or that recruit is coming from. Also has a factor to play with regard to the date that they will arrive here. And I hope that answers it, but that's a good question.
In regards to the pharmacy, is there an option to drop off, check in, and then come back later for pickup? My friend told me they waited about 3 hours the other day just to have the meds brought out to them.
Yeah, so for the most part, and so there's always a scenario that doesn't go as planned. So I've been tracking the statistics over the last 7 days, and we are near or at 100% of people back out of the building with prescription in hand in less than an hour. And so I have a feeling that the scenario that you are laying out, there was a glitch in the process. And so what I'd encourage you to do is, if you ever get to the point that you are at an hour or at that hour mark and you have yet to receive your prescription, please bring it to someone's attention, because it's most likely because something got dropped in the process. So are there ways that we could have you drop it off and then come back at a later time and date? We could. We haven't set that up right now because we are not having any issue that I'm tracking right now with turning around prescriptions rapidly. But I will look into that to see if there are more people that are reporting similar stories and scenarios, and if for some reason there is, we can definitely put a process in place.
By the chart shown for completed AIT transports, it looks like Fort Gordon soldiers have been shipped. Have they?
That is correct, but not all of Fort Gordon soldiers have been shipped because it's a process. It's a pipeline, as we call it. So we can only ship as many as that receiving unit can receive because there's capacity issues across the board. So our total pipeline is not operating the way that it normally does because our AITs have to ship to the first units, and they can only ship as many as the first unit can receive. So right now it's a tight coordination, a very deliberate coordination with numbers. How many can you take? And that's how many we ship because they know their own capacity, but we're not shipping all from one MOS that needs to go to one location all at one time. So that's another reason why you see some of the delays, but it is based on the numbers, how many they can receive. And Fort Gordon has a lot of MOSs that we train here that they need certain amounts of certain MOSs and not the others because of their capacity. But that will get better over time as we get more repetitions under our belt across the board with shipping operations from us to AIT and AIT to their next unit.
Is there any way that sick call could be conducted in the battalion footprint instead of all soldiers going to the TMC? I realize there are those who may need x-rays, but for the normal low-lying illnesses that require minimal meds like Tylenol, cough meds, etc., this could cut down on the contact and congestion and avoid possible contact and infected soldiers.
Great question. We're actually doing more and more of that already. So for certain footprints and scenarios for soldiers that will have in a holding pattern, we are looking at doing the sick call in place. Those would be the ones that once they arrive and also once they have been here. For those barracks that we are segregating soldiers that are PUIs or positives, we are actually doing it virtually and or at place in the footprint. When it comes to all the other battalions across the entire enterprise at Fort Jackson, to be honest with you, it's really a matter of manpower. I just don't have enough medics and physicians and PAs to send to each and every battalion because they all, for the most part, sick call is done in the morning. And so I don't have enough manpower right now to send to each and every battalion all at the same time or in a short window in the morning. But we are actually continuously looking at ways that we can enable some of the folks that we have in place, especially for some of those over-the-counter things like you mentioned, things like Tylenol and cough syrup and stuff like that. We have a couple, so without saying too much right now because the plans are still in development, we have a couple plans in place that we can use some other medical professionals as extenders to try to get as much of that done within those footprints or battalions. Because I agree 110%. The more we can keep, the more people that we can keep segregated, especially those that are not sick, the more that we can keep them away from those that have more serious illnesses, whether it be COVID-19 or any other type of illness, the better off we all are. And so yes, we're looking at different ways of doing it. What we also have done in the TMC footprint is we've actually set up 2 separate footprints. And so if an individual has a respiratory condition, they are not going to the same location that the average trainee with a musculoskeletal injury is. So we've actually set up a second location that's in the same general area as our TMC, but completely separated, just a little bit up the road. And in that location, we are taking care and doing sick call for everyone that shows up with any type of respiratory condition whatsoever, whether it be COVID-19 related or any other type of respiratory condition, just to try to keep that separation and try to minimize any type of cross-contamination. Last thing that we want is someone coming in with a musculoskeletal injury and then walking out with another type of illness. So we're putting all those procedures in place. I'm pretty confident with what we currently have in place, but we will continue to improve it daily and weekly. So thank you for the suggestion. Great suggestion.
Yeah, and thanks, Chad. And on that point, and not to beat a dead horse with regard to that question, but part of this too is, and I've always said it from day one, back on the 5th of March, this is to inform, but it's also to help you understand some of the variables that are a part of all of this. And the one thing that Colonel Koenig did mention is some of our doctors and nurses in our own clinic here, they're Guard and they're reservists. And so when our nation needs them, they get activated. And as you can see in the news, where a lot of Guard and a lot of Reserve has been activated across many states, so we lose some of our manpower. And I will not, as the senior commander, as the commanding general here, stand up and scream, even though we need, but we all have to play. We all have to understand what we're trying to do and what our nation needs us to do, so we can make do with what we have. It's not going to look perfect. It's not going to be what everybody thinks is the best solution, but some of this is not necessarily asking for your sympathy, because that's something that we don't need, to be quite honest. But your empathy, absolutely. Understand some of the variables, and that's part of us informing you, me informing you of what we deal with. Is that solution would be great. We would love to have the optimal solution. But in order to serve our nation best, we give up doctors and nurses in order to help other states that are in more dire need. So in that case, we can get by with what we have. It's not going to look perfect, but we have what we need. And I appreciate that question, and I hope you understand some of what we have to deal with as part of the variables. But thanks.
Trainees being medically discharged, when will they be sent home?
For medically discharged trainees, that all depends. That timeline for the medical discharge, it depends on what factors are involved, what the type of separation are. And in most cases, I would tell you roughly 2 weeks is the goal. That is the goal from the point of that separation being initiated until they're out and then on their way home. But it varies. Some will go faster, some will go slower. But if you have a question with regard to that, I would ask you to go to either inbox the 193rd Infantry Brigade, because they control a lot of our processing, or you can send a note here or call our legal office, and they can give you at least a read, not all the details, on generally where that packet is with regard to approval and a rough estimate of time for them to get home, but not necessarily an exact date. And I hope that helps.
Is it possible to just limit the workforce to half the employees so everyone doesn't have to come in?
We have done that already. So if you're part of the workforce here, that's something you should know. To be quite honest, we have a majority of our workforce teleworking, and I, and not anybody else, implemented a 30% workforce reduction on top of that. So a lot of our workforce is home, not working. Unfortunately, a lot of our workforce can't telework. You can't telework as a drill sergeant. You can't telework as a seamstress. Same with a bus driver. I can go on and on. I'm not being sarcastic or smart, but that is something, and part of this, so I'm glad you're on and getting informed on those things that we have put out. But we've doubled down on our telework force and created for ourselves a reserve, so everyone's not coming in. And Chad has an additional point to add.
Yeah, and so the one caveat to all that is, and this kind of goes directly in line with the previous question. So we're all trying to follow General Beagle's guidance as much as possible, but I will be the first to admit that depending upon the specialty and what you do across the installation, that is not always possible. So my footprint is probably the perfect example. I would love to send half my footprint home right now. Unfortunately, if we want to continue that medical care for the trainee and we want to continue those separation physicals and all the other medical care that we provide, my footprint is probably one of those that is not able, or actually not probably, my footprint is one of those that's not able to reduce our manpower as much as we would like to create that reserve.
Thanks, Chad. Okay.
How long do test results take to confirm whether a trainee is positive or negative for COVID-19?
So that question is layered. It all depends where we send the test to. But as previously mentioned, we now have limited in-house capacity. If we do the testing, take the sample and do the testing in-house, it can be as soon as the same day. Our second, third, and fourth order labs are everywhere from Fort Gordon to the state to a contract that we have, and each one of them has a slightly different turnaround. And we are extremely fortunate here in South Carolina. In some other states, to include Georgia, they're waiting 7 to 10 days at times. Even inside South Carolina, some footprints, some of the private hospitals, et cetera, are waiting a little bit longer. But for the most part, we have our test results back within 72 days or less, 96 hours at the most. So far that I've been tracking, the longest we've had to wait is 96 hours, but most times it's even a lot faster than that.
Given the need for social distancing, do you believe the integrity of the soldier in training can be maintained given they will not be able to participate in the hand-on-hand combat training and pugil stick training?
So the integrity of the soldier, I mean, I don't think combatives or pugil stick has anything to do with their integrity per se. We look at it with regard to their warrior ethos and then their warrior spirit. That's kind of what they get from that, a little bit more grit. But by taking that out, that's just a smart thing to do. There's other ways to make that up in terms of rigor with the other training that we do. We have one of the most rigorous final training exercises anywhere in our Army. If you want to compare it to any other service, I think it would beat that out as well. But 81 hours that they do in their final exercise, over 40 miles they walk during that same period. So we have ways of ensuring that we don't lose any of that warrior ethos that we're trying to instill in them. Grit, we don't think we're going to lose that with taking combatives out. But if you think about combatives, now we're putting ourselves a little bit more at risk, same with pugils, by keeping those things in. It's not going to be forever. We're not completely taking that out forever. But for now, those things, because it's smart to do, it's a way to mitigate, it's a way to reduce our risk to the trainees, those soldiers in training, that has come out. But we have other ways of making up for that, and our drill sergeants are very good at maintaining grit, integrity, and all the Army values along with it. But great point.
Why are we not closing Gate 1?
Why are we not closing Gate 1? I've never had a question of why are we not closing a gate. There's always opening up additional gates, but for Gate 1, that is a next step. Again, we have not fully escalated through all of our measures. If we get to a point in time where we need to, based on manpower or other things, conditions change, then that is one of our options. Again, whether we need manpower or just for different conditions, closing Gate 1. But for right now, Gate 1 will remain open for at least the foreseeable future until conditions change.
Are you able to tell us how we can donate face mask coverings?
Yes, if you want to donate, that'll go through our MWR. The post from several days ago on both my page, this Facebook page, as well as the Fort Jackson page had that address posted, and then Wes, you can talk them through any other additional points if you'd like.
Thank you, sir. If you go to the MWR website, there is a link there that also tells how personnel can donate here at Fort Jackson. We do have a point of contact, Ms. Chris Vogel, and she is very aggressive at assessing those donations to the installation to determine what is acceptable. But if you check that website and also check the posts that have been on social media over the last few days, you'll be able to find that information to allow you to donate.
Can care packages still be sent to our soldiers in training?
If you have a soldier still in training, yes, you can still send your your packages, your mail, whatever you send per normal, as long as they're in training. If they're complete with training, I would ask that you hold on that because the timelines differ. If they've already graduated and you know they're somewhere within that 2-week window, and that could be sooner or later, to hold on those packages, they will have their phones and can tell you what their status is, and then we won't have a loss of mail or a case of your package arrives and they're no longer here.
Why are you holding trainees for 2 more weeks?
It's not a matter of me holding trainees for 2 more weeks. Trust me, that is not a personal preference, but given our shipping process and what is linked to and the approvals that have to be granted for us to ship to certain locations, we're not arbitrarily holding soldiers that have graduated. It's based on where we can ship to, their ability to receive, and the transportation methods that we have to leverage to get them there.
We don't have any more questions, sir.
Okay.
We don't have any new questions, sir.
Okay. So no new questions. If you feel your question didn't get answered, either repost that question or we'll go through again and answer those questions online for you. But we'll get the answer to you. A lot of times there are different questions. Sometimes questions are stated the same way, but they're unique circumstances, and the answer doesn't apply to everybody. And it's very hard to get through every single one of those questions. But keep your questions coming there. Between myself and the rest of the team, we'll get the answers posted to you, or you can inbox if you prefer. If you have a very unique situation that doesn't apply to everybody, send that to the inbox so we can answer it there. Which gets me to my last point before we end. If you refer back to the last slide that I showed at the bottom of it, I'm not going to ask the team to go back to that slide, but it said next week we're going to try a new approach. We're going to do what I call the Fast 40. So we're still going to have an hour. We're going to take 40 minutes. I'm bringing the Sergeant Major, and the Sergeant Major and I are going to sit down, and we're going to answer the questions on the screen. And we're going to go that route. We're going to tackle it 2 different ways with regard to answering questions online, and we'll sit here physically and just go after your questions. I'm not going to have my great crew here with me from Garrison and Medak, and I'll do my best not to screw it up for them and answer their questions. But because we continually hear my questions not answered, and again, I think there's a lot of very unique questions, then we're just going to go straight at it, point to point, look at your question. Hopefully there's a lot more shout outs than there are bad things to be said, but they're there because I've told you from the beginning, I owe it to you to be transparent. Be transparent to you as I can possibly be. Let you know the information that we have in real time as we have it. And as a lot of you that have been with us from day one can see, this information changes rapidly. So there's nothing that we're trying to hide. We're trying to relay to you that we're doing everything within our power, within the power of our leaders and our drill sergeants to take care of them. Because our priority number 1 is to protect the force so that we protect our mission, because our mission is what you need us to do. We do not have the luxury of taking a time out. So I'll end with saying thank you for being here and joining us on this virtual town hall, like all of our previous town halls, and your time. That's one thing I can never give you back, is your time. But I know you're concerned about your soldier, you're concerned about your drill sergeant, you're concerned about your leader, you're concerned about your spouse that may work here on installation, and we're concerned about our community. But I appreciate all of you. And again, I ask you for one thing and one thing only, is your empathy. At least try to understand from a position of what we do when we take the oath to our nation. We take that oath to support and defend our nation against all enemies, foreign and domestic. It's to protect our great citizens out there like all of you, and understand that there's a lot of sacrifice in that. There's a lot of things that we give up when we take that oath. So I appreciate you being empathetic, especially during this time. There's a lot of friction, anxiety, stress, and fear that's out there already. And our goal is, my job is every day to try to reduce that, turn it down as low as I can possibly do it, because we have our mission to do. The Army is not going to tell us to stop. As the Sergeant Major of the Army has said, the Army is still open. We're going to continue to train. That's what our nation needs us to do. We don't have that luxury of saying time out. And the last thing I would ask all of you, continue to practice social distance where you are. We will do it here. We will do it to the best of our ability. That does not impact our mission. We will use face covers, as you've seen. Again, I can't thank our team here enough, and for any donations to send what you're going to send to us, but we have a team that's working that day and night, and we have very field expedient methods to ensure that your soldier is protected with a face cover. And then please comply. I think our biggest threat going forward is lack of compliance. So if you don't know, go back, revisit other posts. Go visit your unit posts. A lot of times we get questions that are specific to a unit. If you know that unit, go there. I'm not trying to push you away from any of the other sites, but go directly to that unit. I know all of my commanders, their heart's in it, and they understand what you're going through as well and what you need in terms of information, and they want to give it to you. So we've got to connect you. That's been our other commitment, is to connect you to the right points of information. So thank you all. We'll see you next week for the Fast 40. Have your questions teed up, ready to go. If it's a more detailed question, I ask that you inbox it, and we will tackle it for a majority of 40 minutes, if not a little bit more, directly at your questions. But I appreciate you tuning in with us to keep yourself informed, and I hope that you understand a little bit more of what we deal with day in and day out. But it's what we do. And thank you, and stop the spread.